The lights hit her rearview mirror at 2:14 in the morning, and Cara Whitfield's first thought wasn't panic. It was math. She did the math automatically, the way she'd learned to do everything. Deliberate, fast, no wasted motion. She wasn't speeding. She'd signaled at every turn. Her registration was current, her insurance was active, and the only thing she'd done in the last hour was finish a 14-hour shift at Cedar Falls Regional and drive home on a road that was nearly empty except for her. She pulled to the curb and put the car in park. Officer Brett Slade took his time walking up. Cara watched him in the side mirror. Broad shoulders, mid-30s, his hand resting on his belt in that particular way cops sometimes did when they wanted you to notice it. When he reached her window, he didn't bend down to her eye level. He stood straight, making her crane her neck up to see him. License and registration. No greeting, no explanation of why she'd been pulled over. Cara reached for the glove box. Her movements were slower than they used to be, slower than they'd been before the training accident at Fort Carson 7 years ago, before the L4 vertebra had compressed in a way the surgeons described as structurally significant, which was their clinical way of saying her spine had been permanently rearranged. She kept a brace in her locker at the station. She'd forgotten to put it back on when the shift ran long. The fumbling with the latch made Slade's posture shift. Hands where I can see them. "I'm getting my registration," Cara said. "I'll have it out in a second." She pulled the documents free and held them up. Slade took them without a word, his flashlight sweeping across her face, then the interior of the car. His beam stopped on the back aunt. The paramedic bag sat in plain view, a red hard-sided kit with a white cross on the lid, standard issue for anyone who brought their equipment home between shifts. Beside it was a portable oxygen cylinder, small enough to fit in a backpack. In the passenger footwell was a locked Pelican case that held her controlled substances kit, epinephrine, atropine, naloxone, all logged, all licensed, all legal under her paramedic certification. "Step out of the vehicle." Cara exhaled through her nose. "Can I ask why I was pulled over?" "Step out, ma'am." The ma'am that wasn't polite, the one that meant the conversation was already over. She opened the door and began the process of getting out, which wasn't simple and hadn't been for 7 years. She gripped the doorframe, shifted her weight, and eased herself upright. The motion was slow. Slade watched it, without offering his hand, without stepping back to give her room, without saying anything at all. "You injured?" he asked when she was finally standing. "Yes," Cara said. "Service-related. Spinal compression. It affects my mobility, especially after long shifts." Slade looked her up and down. She was 5'4", lean, dark-haired, 32 years old. She didn't look like what people pictured when they thought combat veteran, and she'd long since stopped trying to explain the gap between the image and the reality. "What's all this?" He was already moving toward her back seat, pulling the door open without asking. "I'm a paramedic," Cara said. "That's my equipment." He unzipped the red kit, gauze, airways, a pulse oximeter, a blood pressure cuff, then the Pelican case. He tried the latch, locked. "What's in here?" "Controlled substances for field use. Epinephrine, atropine, naloxone. I'm licensed to carry them. You can call Cedar Falls Regional to confirm." Slade set the case on the hood of her car like it was evidence at a crime scene. He was standing across from her now, arms crossed. "You on anything tonight?" "No." "Any of these medications, did you take any before driving?" "I take a prescription muscle relaxant for my back injury. I took it 6 hours ago. I'm not impaired." "That's a judgment call. I'm not comfortable leaving to you." Cara's jaw tightened. "I've been a paramedic for 4 years. I know what impairment looks like." "Then you should know why I'm concerned." Slade gestured toward the empty road behind them. "You were weaving." She had not been weaving. She knew it. He knew it. The dashcam on his cruiser knew it, if the footage would ever see daylight. "I'd like you to perform a field sobriety assessment," Slade said, "starting with a straight-line walk. Then I'll need you to kneel." And there it was. Cara had spent 7 years learning to read a room. It was a skill you developed in the Army before you developed anything else. The ability to see the shape of a situation before it fully arrived. This wasn't a traffic stop. This was a setup. If she tried to walk, Her gait would fail. The spinal compression made her left leg drag when she was tired, and after 14 hours on her feet, she was very tired. If she attempted to kneel, she wouldn't be able to get back up without assistance. Slade would document all of it as proof of impairment, and everything she said after that point would be filtered through that conclusion. If she refused, she'd be arrested for non-compliance. I have a documented spinal injury, Cara said carefully. I cannot complete those tasks, not because I'm impaired, but because my spine doesn't allow it. If you need confirmation, call the VA in Des Moines. They have my full file. Slade's expression didn't change. Walk the line or I'm placing you under arrest. A car passed slowly on the opposite side of the road. Cara caught a glimpse of a phone held up to the window. Someone was filming. She reached into her jacket pocket for her own phone, slowly, visibly, and held the screen up so Slade could see she was unlocking it. I'm making a call, she said. Put the phone down. I have the right to make a call. Put it down now. She pressed the contact near the top of her list. Not her supervisor. Not a lawyer. Someone she hadn't called in 3 years. Someone she'd hoped she'd never need to call this way again. It rang twice. A man's voice answered, clipped and awake even at this hour. Whitfield. I need you, Cara said. Corner of Meridian and Route 9, Cedar Falls. A pause. Brief. How long do you need me to be? Soon as you can. The line went dead. Slade grabbed for the phone. Cara slipped it into her pocket and met his eyes. Who did you call? She didn't answer. He stepped closer, filling the space between them, and the sound cut him off. Low, steady, the rumble of engines that weren't rushing but weren't stopping either. Slade turned toward the street. 2 dark SUVs rolled into the intersection and stopped, positioned across both lanes. The doors opened in unison, and 4 people stepped out. No uniforms, no markings, just dark jackets and the kind of deliberate movement that didn't need a badge to communicate authority. A woman walked directly toward Slade. She was compact, early 40s, with close-cropped gray at her temples and a face that had made 100 difficult decisions and stopped losing sleep over them. She held up a credential wallet. Agent Diana Reyes, VA Office of Inspector General. Step away from the vehicle. Slade blinked. I'm in the middle of a stop. You were, Reyes said. Step back. One of the other agents approached Cara, older, heavier, with a kind of calm that came from doing this long enough that very little surprised him anymore. Mrs. Whitfield. He kept his voice low. You all right? I'm standing, she said, which wasn't quite the same thing, but it was true. We've got it from here. She watched as agents photographed the contents of her car, handling everything carefully, returning it exactly as it had been. Another agent spoke quietly into a radio. Slade stood by his cruiser looking like a man who had just realized the floor wasn't where he thought it was. Reyes returned to where Cara was standing. We'll need a formal statement, but not tonight. You've been on shift for 14 hours. Go home. What happens to him? Cara nodded toward Slade. Reyes's expression didn't shift. His lieutenant is being notified right now. His body camera footage is being preserved. He has a lot of questions to answer in the morning. Cara limped back to her car. Her back was screaming now, the standing, the tension, the cold. She got into the driver's seat, sat for a moment with both hands on the wheel, and then started the engine. In the rearview mirror, Slade stood very still while an agent photographed the scene. He looked smaller somehow, with his hand no longer resting on his belt. She drove home. She didn't sleep. She lay in the dark and replayed every second of the stop until the details were as sharp as they were going to get. The way Slade had moved, the way he'd handled her equipment, the way he'd framed every response as if her answers were already wrong before she gave them. By the time Reyes called at 8:15 the following morning, Cara was already dressed. The conference room at the Federal Building smelled like old coffee. On the table were printed records and a laptop open to a spreadsheet. We pulled Officer Slade's incident record going back 5 years, Reyes said. On the surface, it's clean. Good reviews, no sustained complaints. But we started pulling individual stop reports. She turned the laptop toward Cara. 11 traffic stops in the past 14 months involving veterans with VA-issued medical cards. 9 of those individuals had documented disabilities. 6 filed informal complaints. None were ever processed through the official system. Cara stared at the table. That's not random. No, Reyes said. It's not. She pulled up another document. 3 of those individuals were asked to perform sobriety assessments they physically couldn't complete due to documented conditions. 2 were arrested. Charges dropped within 48 hours in both cases, but the arrest records existed. Why does a dropped arrest record matter? Because someone was collecting them. Reyes set a printed page in front of Cara. A company called Meridian Data Services. Private firm, contracts with insurance adjusters and legal defense teams. They compile incident profiles on individuals. An arrest record, even a dropped one, can affect benefit eligibility, custody proceedings, employment background checks. The profiles are sold. The people on them never know they're on them. The room was very quiet. He was targeting people who wouldn't fight back, Cara said. People who'd been told their word meant less. People who, if they complained, would face exactly the kind of scrutiny they'd spent years being trained to avoid. Reyes leaned back. You called us instead of complying. That wasn't what he was counting on. It got worse before it got better. On the 9th day, she found a note under her windshield wiper. Block letters on notebook paper. You don't want this fight. She photographed it and forwarded it to Reyes before she'd even gotten her keys out of her pocket. Reyes texted back in under 2 minutes. Save the paper. Don't touch it again. We're logging everything. On the 12th day, Reyes called with something that made the floor tilt. Slade's body camera footage, Reyes said. The file was flagged for deletion at 2:37 in the morning, 17 minutes after we were on scene. Someone accessed the department's admin system from inside the building and tried to wipe it. Did they succeed? We recovered it, but the access log points to a department admin account held by a retired Cedar Falls lieutenant named Gary Colton. He'd been handling internal complaints for 3 years. A pause. He also handled 3 of the 6 buried complaints against Slade. The shape of it was becoming clear. Not one bad cop, a system. Colton was brought in on a Thursday. He arrived with a lawyer and the posture of a man who wasn't worried. He left 3 hours later looking significantly smaller. What Colton gave them, 2 names above him in the arrangement, a union official, and the records administrator who had been providing Meridian Data Services with copies of arrest logs for 6 years, not just from Slade's stops, from 11 officers. Cara learned this in pieces, over phone calls from Reyes at irregular hours. She sat in her apartment after each call and tried to calibrate how large this actually was. It was larger than she'd thought when the lights had appeared in her mirror on Route 9. A woman named Phoebe Garland called 3 weeks in. Army veteran, 15-year service record, walked with a cane. Slade had stopped her 18 months ago. Same setup, same trap, arrest for obstruction, charges dropped, complaint buried. I decided the cost of fighting was higher than the cost of living with it, Garland said. I've spent a year and a half wondering whether I was right. You survived it, Cara said. Yes, but you didn't just survive it. Garland's voice was steady. 2 of the others want to meet you, not for the case, just to meet. They met at a diner off Route 9 on a Saturday morning, 6 people around a corner table, some with visible injuries, some without, a man who'd been a Marine, a woman who'd done 3 tours as a flight medic, Garland with her cane, Cara with her back brace finally on. Nobody talked about the case. They talked about their service, their transitions, the particular exhaustion of having to justify yourself to systems that were supposed to already know you. They talked about the moments they'd stayed quiet when they should have spoken. The federal charges moved quickly. Colton pled out. The records administrator pled out. The 2 union officials went to trial and lost. Slade faced charges on both state and federal levels: unlawful detention, civil rights violations, conspiracy. Reyes called when the verdicts came in. Slade, convicted on all counts. The judge is not in a generous mood. She paused. Meridian Data Services is facing a shutdown order and a class action covering everyone whose information was collected without consent. You're in that class. So are the other 5. So are a lot of other people. Cara was standing in the parking lot of Cedar Falls Regional at the start of her shift when the call came. She watched an ambulance pull out of the bay. lights moving fast into the early dark, and held the phone against her ear until the sound faded. She clocked in and worked the next 12 hours. 3 months after Meridian and Route 9, she stood in a community center in South Cedar Falls in front of 40 people. Veterans, healthcare workers, people who'd been stopped without cause, people who'd filed complaints that had gone nowhere. And she told them what had actually happened. Not the version the news had told, the real one. The version where she'd been exhausted and scared and hadn't known for 4 days whether any of it was going to work. "I'm not here because I won," she said. "Winning doesn't mean anything if you keep it to yourself." A man in the back row raised his hand. "What do we do if it happens again? Most of us don't have the contacts you had." Cara thought about the number she'd put in her phone 3 years ago without really thinking she'd ever use it. She thought about Jake Moreno, her former company commander at Fort Carson, the one who'd sat with her in the post-surgery room and said the mission doesn't end, it just changes shape. She thought about what it meant that she'd had that number, that he'd answered. "You build the network before you need it," she said. "You document everything, and you find one person you trust to answer when you call. Then you become that person for someone else." After the event, a young woman waited until the room had mostly cleared out. She was maybe 26, wearing a jacket with an 82nd Airborne patch on the shoulder, leaning against the wall with the careful posture of someone managing pain she wasn't going to mention. "I was stopped 8 months ago," she said quietly. "The officer said my plates were flagged. They weren't. He searched the whole car. I had my service dog with me, and he made her stay outside in the cold, and she was. She stopped, started again. I filed a complaint. They said there wasn't enough to pursue." Cara looked at her. "What's your name?" "Tony Marsh, a breath, Sergeant Tony Marsh, 3rd ID. Cara handed her a card with her personal number on the back. "Call me tomorrow. We'll go through everything you have and figure out what comes next." She walked to her car in the November dark, her back tight, her breath fogging the cold air. She thought about Phoebe Garland, who now ran a complaint intake line out of her apartment in Waterloo. About the 2 Cedar Falls officers who'd known about the buried complaints and had finally 6 months after the arrests come forward with their own documentation. About the policy changes that had passed and the ones that hadn't yet. She started the car and pulled onto Route 9, heading east. The road was empty. The city lights fell away behind her. Somewhere across Cedar Falls, Tony Marsh was going home to decide whether to make a call. The work wasn't finished. It wouldn't be finished. That was the part nobody told you, that justice wasn't a destination you arrived at and stayed. It was a direction. You chose it again every day, in ways that were small and unglamorous and often invisible, and the choosing was what made it real. Cara drove through the quiet dark of a city that would never know most of what had been built in its margins by people who had decided that being made smaller was not the same as being small. Tomorrow she'd call Tony Marsh back. Tonight, that was enough.